Masoud Aqil spent 280 days in the torture chambers of the Islamic State terrorist group in Syria. The 24-year-old Kurd finally regained his freedom in a prisoner exchange and fled to Europe. He brought with him valuable intelligence about the IS and its supporters, some of whom appear to have mixed in with the refugees. Masoud Aqil spent months collecting names and then handed the list over to the police. How valuable are tips from refugees in fighting terrorism? In early January 2016, Masoud Aqil and his mother left Syria for Germany, where his brothers and his sister were already living.
I took the decision of leaving because of some security reasons. I was obliged to do that, like any other person who was obliged to leave his home, his city, his country.
For 2 years, Masoud Aqil had chronicled the conflict in Syria with his video camera, reporting for a Kurdish television broadcaster in neighboring Iraq. In summer 2014, he got images of thousands of mostly Kurdish Yazidis in Iraq's Sinjar Mountains fleeing from IS terrorists into Syria.
We couldn't believe that in the 21st century of this time that something could happen. A big area like Sinjar could be attacked by ISIS, and thousands of people, how it could be that they would be kidnapped. And we made some pictures in the beginning, and later we stopped covering and we started to help the people.
IS's genocide of the Yazidis numbers among the worst of its many atrocities. Masoud Aqil witnessed much of it firsthand.
They were talking about the first massacres of ISIS there in the beginning of August. How did they attack them? How did they started to cut the head of the old women, to cut the head of the kids, tearing the kids into two pieces, kidnapping the young women to later use them as sex slaves. I blame all the world because let them an easy target for this kind of wolves, of monsters.
The video journalist reported on the war for 2 years and then fell victim to it himself. Masoud Aqil was abducted near this intersection. It's a painful memory. It was the start of 9 months in the IS's torture chambers.
The longest time was in Raqqa prison. It was for around 100 days. It was a football stadium in the main city center of Raqqa city. Here it was. Somewhere here in this place. Yeah.
One of the torture methods is known as balango. The victim is hung up and beaten.
The torturing was a routine. It was such a kind of something should be done. Sometimes in the day which they didn't torture any prisoner, we were feeling that something is missing, something weird is happening. Yeah. So that the only way you are to endure that was to live with it.
It left psychological and emotional scars. A few psychotherapists in Germany are well acquainted with the IS's torture victims. Jan Kieselhan has also heard Masoud Aqil's accounts. He says many of the refugees now living in Germany have experienced torture.
Your feelings change, your values, and the whole core of who you are. The torturers seek to destroy the personality the individual had before they were captured. It's very deliberate. IS wanted to build a totalitarian state. Prisons and torture are part of the methods used in totalitarianism.
I met many tens of ISIS members there, ISIS prisoners they were, and ISIS members were telling me what they want and how do they act. and they were finding all these killings and all this torturing, they were finding it useful.
His 280 days in captivity were spread among 6 IS torture chambers. The Kurdish People's Protection Units tried for months to get the journalist out. The men and women fighters from this Syrian minority number among the IS's fiercest adversaries. Finally, in September 2015, Masoud Aqil was freed as part of a prisoner exchange. He was the first Kurdish civilian to emerge alive from the IS's prisons in Syria. He had to leave the country immediately. The risk of falling into the terrorists' hands once again was too great. In late 2015, like hundreds of thousands of others, he fled to Europe, reaching Austria first and then Germany. Even before he arrived, Masoud Aqil realized that IS was also active in Europe, carrying out attacks in Brussels and Paris. He started researching and writing a book about his experiences in the torture chambers.
Good to read. Yes, you
In Vienna, he met with journalists in an effort to market the book. He followed events in Syria closely, communicating with his contacts there daily.
I had ISIS area control.
These people, there are some people, you know.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
There are some people, but the people who doesn't know anything, so we can't ask anything from them. 3 years I want.
Masoud Aqil collected all the information he could, concentrating on tips leading to terrorist supporters from the IS's prisons. And it didn't take him long to find them, often right on the internet. Once in Europe, he devoted his days and often entire nights to his research. He made a shocking discovery. Some of the IS members he'd met in prison were now living in Europe. Among them is this man, masquerading as a refugee.
Unfortunately, they are not refugees. They are, let's say, criminals, bad people, people who had to join the radical groups, Islamic radical groups, or people who had did crimes against the civilians in Syria or in Iraq.
The president of Germany's domestic intelligence agency, Hans-Georg Maaßen, explains why they're in Europe.
There is the group of IS terrorists who have come to Europe with the task of conducting terror attacks. But then there's another group of IS fighters who perhaps just want to remove themselves from the fighting. They're still dangerous because they totally believe the ideology, even if they haven't been commissioned to carry out an attack at this time.
Masoud Aqil put together a list of names for the police, Masoud's list, augmented by information from the Kurds in Syria.
I have a source too from the Kurdish forces and other members of other Islamic radical groups I met in the prison.
This man is alleged to be an IS supporter who served prison time for a minor infraction. He's reported to be living in Switzerland.
We believe that in many cases, this information from refugees is genuine and reliable and needs to be investigated. There is, of course, also information which we believe is incorrect or just can't be proven.
But in this case, the refugee Masoud Aqil claims to know from one of the prisons actually lives here. And he believes him to be an IS sympathizer.
Have you ever been in an ISIS prison? كنت بسجن لداعش كمان؟ نعم. Yeah. Where was that? وين كان؟ الشدادي. الشدادي.
There were IS people from Hasaka who kidnapped me because I used to take part in demonstrations against the regime.
The man's claim that he had previously been tortured by the Assad regime comes as a surprise. Is he more a victim or a perpetrator?
And is that realistic?
Not at all, no.
Masoud Aqil thinks the man's claims are not in the least believable. But then he seems to have second thoughts.
He said that, tell him that they arrested me because I refused hold the gun in the demonstrations, not against ISIS.
We believe well over 80% of the tips from refugees are reliable.
But skeptics, such as Middle East expert Guido Steinberg, sound a note of caution.
A lot of the information provided by refugees is incorrect and simply aimed at defaming others. So you have to treat these accusations very carefully.
You were sure that he's an ISIS guy?
He was an ISIS member.
How?
He was an ISIS member.
How come that you were so sure?
He was talking about that. Nobody have this kind of evidence which the authorities need. We can't, as I told you, we can't bring their fingerprints from there to here.
The debate over how valuable tips from refugees are in finding IS members in Europe is just beginning. Masoud Aqil is hoping law enforcement will follow every lead and bring his torturers to justice.